Well, welcome to Down River Cottage Garden. And we started this back when we moved here from Connecticut in 1993. So we've been at it a while. And the house was a simple beach cottage of 1940 vintage. And so what we really wanted to do was sort of keep the gardens in a cottage format kind of thing, not too fancy. And so anyway, we started with things that we brought from our Connecticut home, and they got sort of tucked in, and in many places they're still sitting there where they first got placed. But one of the focuses for Ro and I is organic. So you will see the lawn is just full of white clover. And it stays green. It doesn't go dormant like crabgrass or other invasives. The rabbits love it, and we have kind of a symbiotic relationship with the rabbits. If we keep the clover in the lawn, they're pretty happy there, and mostly stay out of the gardens. So we hope that works and continues to work. So this is Nepeta, catmint. Very common plant, and the square stems will always identify the mints. And the bees absolutely love it. And when it starts to die back, which will be in another few weeks, in a month's time or so, I'll have to cut it right down, and it breaks my heart because the bees are sort of following me as I'm taking it down. But it's a nice little border. And this is Happy Return Daylily, and that's the sister plant to the Stella d'Oro, and they're just great, and they will be cut down and bloom again. And in here is I'm going to brag. See, there's a dahlia about to break open, and it will be, I think, the first dahlia in Charlestown. I'm not sure, but I'd like to think that it might be. And I have a little bit of a running competition with my dahlia friends. And they always say I'm much too eager to put my dahlias in, but then I say, yes, but I want them to bloom in June. And I think I'm going to have a bloom to show them. And the backdrop is the old standard Jacomanni clematis, and that'll bloom for quite a long time. And it's I think it's one of the easiest ones to grow. So it makes a nice little entrance garden. In the way of trying to make gardening a little easier to deal with, because there's an awful lot that people get taken, like sort of overwhelmed with. All of the border on our property is shrubbery, which really doesn't require much. Occasional trim, but beyond that, not very much. And they start in April with Cornell pink azalea, and they go right through the fall. There's a lot of native stuff in here. A swamp maple, this rangy old plant back in there, is a native swamp maple. Swamp azalea, I apologize, swamp azalea. And you want these natives because they are the ones that the bees, birds, insects all rely on. So I'm very happy about that. It does come into bloom in July. It's very fragrant. It's a nice plant. And then back in here, this kind of architectural little tree is beach plum, a native beach plum. And I like that because it's covered in a frosty white blossom. We have two on the property, and then it puts the plums out, which the birds just love. And back in there, the tall tree is a black tupelo, and that is a native plant, and it also has blossoms that the birds and insects love. So and that quince has fruit that after it's bloomed, it has a bloom in May. So pretty much it's just shrubs. There's what do we call that? A witch hazel. And beyond that, there's a native pussy willow. So and more shrubs just doing their thing. We have, in addition to those that are good for the native birds and bees, we have this bank here of ilex, winterberry, and it is just, as you may be able to pick out, full of berries just about to start forming. And come October, end of September, October, it's a massive red berries. It's very nice because at that time of year, we're not looking at very much anymore, you know, and so it comes along at a time when we're very grateful for the color, but more importantly, it's good for the birds. And you can see the robins before they migrate, they just flock here and feed and feed and feed. So I'm assuming they're getting their energy up for their migration. So this year I decided to renovate a few gardens. You know, if you've been at it since 1993, there's stuff that you just look at and you forget what it even looks like anymore. It's just there, you know. And so there were 3 gardens that I decided to renovate, and this was one of them. And it all came up, except for the lilac. I kept the lilac, and it all came up, and then we took all the weeds out and replanted it. It's a bit of an exercise. I got some help, to be honest. I couldn't do it all myself, so I got some help. But coming through the arbor, the rose arbor, this sort of opens up into a landscape. And it's not fancy, but it gives a little sense of something going on. And, you know, a garden really is a collection of people and places. And when you think about every time you look at a plant or a garden, it reminds you of something that you've seen or done that was so impressive. And I have a group of such impressive friends, the gardener friends. They've all inspired me. And sometimes it's, like in this case, this deck had to be redone, and that meant taking out some bushes that were there. And then suddenly there was a kind of a blank palette, and I said, wow. And then my dearest friend and I went out to Vancouver Island in British Columbia, and we toured some private gardens there, as well as the big public gardens. And I was inspired by a gardener there and came home. I had taken pictures and came home, and now I will have to say, hers was magnificent. This will be nice, but it won't be magnificent. But it is full of balloon flower, and those people who are familiar with that, it's an azure blue, and it just will rotate all the way through here. And in the back there is Bobo hydrangea, which is a lovely white tinged with pink. And then it gets highlighted with some dahlias that are, of course, just beginning now. So we won't see those blossoms for another few weeks. But they're forming up. As a dahlia grower, you have to be committed because they have to be lifted in this climate. You can't. Do you garden at all? Yeah? You know, as a gardener, you just have to make a commitment, and then once you're into it, you say, I can do this. This is not so hard. And so we store them in the basement, bring them out, plant them in the spring, and that's when my dahlia friends are saying, you're doing it too early. You shouldn't do that. You should wait. But then I've got that one on the other side that's in blossom. And when that is in blossom, tomorrow or the next day, take a picture and say, ta-da! We have a blossom in June, barely. So we've got this bed here, which the whole concept here was to do something primarily with foliage, so that, you know, people don't feel that they always have to have a bunch of flowers. Now, I must admit, when I put this, I call it my purple passion, together, I did throw in a few iris to make a nice wave of iris down through here to give it some interest. But even when the iris are not in blossom, they're a variegated leaf. I actually use a leaf for flower arrangements and very happily works quite nicely. And this Japanese forest grass is a nice accent, and I use the chartreuse colors around to sort of highlight the darker purples. I expect that if some gardeners are looking at this, they might take a look at this barberry and be a bit dismayed, because barberry is considered invasive. Unless you get this variety or any variety that is sterile, that doesn't produce the berries. And this has got a lovely color, and it is deciduous, so you know it isn't so. I mean, it's got color late into the fall, and it's a good one for that purpose. And the smoke bush, everybody loves that. It's very common, makes wonderful flower arrangements again, and it never gets to smoke though. People who have smoke bush know it gets tall and then it has a very frothy blossom on the top, which is the smoke part. Well, this one never gets to smoke because if it did get way up there, everything else would be out of balance. So I routinely give it a haircut, and I'm using it in floral arrangements all the time. So that, but it's a nice little foliage garden, and even without the blooms of the iris, it works pretty nice. So just as an aside, you know, gardens are in transition constantly, and the very fact that in October we had an enormous maple right in the middle behind that patio and where that second wall is, an absolutely enormous maple, is probably as tall as the white pines back there, and it went over in a storm in October, and it changed the whole feel of the backyard. So it's opened up some possibilities, and that's not a bad thing. It's just an adjustment. And the vegetable garden, I think everybody's probably doing pretty well with the vegetables this year, because we had a fair amount of rain in the initial planting period, and so we're harvesting now. And I don't know, is there any point in seeing anything more? I don't think it's especially unique in the way of a vegetable garden, but maybe we do a lot of mulching in the vegetable garden, and that has made it possible to manage the weeding. Without the mulch, you'd really be overwhelmed with the amount of weeding that needed to be done. But with the mulching, it's pretty weed-free. And we're harvesting here now peas and lettuce and herbs. The squash is forming up. And we're pretty hopeful we'll have a real good, nice crop of potatoes. We got fingerling potatoes in there this year. And so now that clump in the corner there, that's comfrey. Comfrey tea is a common thing, and the early folks used comfrey for many medicinal uses. We have it because someone said, and I wish I even knew who that was because it was so many years ago, that if you have comfrey in your garden, you won't have a woodchuck. So, fingers crossed, the comfrey is working. We don't know, but at one point we did have issues with woodchuck, but not anymore. So, when I mention how a garden is a collection of places and people. This was a gift of seeds from a friend in England, and it was probably around 1998, or maybe around that time. And I admired the poppies in her garden, and she said, "Oh, here, let me give you some seeds." And now they make themselves at home here every year, and I'm thrilled to think of Joan when I see these in her beautiful English garden. And you know, I'm going to say, I wore a skirt and I wore a blouse. Didn't wear the pearls, but if you were an English lady showing a garden, you would always have on a skirt and sensible shoes. Oh dear. So our little vegetable plot is working well, and we'll go back up here. I guess that, again, the whole border is shrubs. More winterberry, leucothea, laurel, variety Carol is just finished blooming. Back there is a big rhododendron that bloomed beautifully. So there's the Chamaecyparis is the yellow conifer there. And now that the maple is gone, it likes it here better. And it's now the yellow color is coming out. But it was not that clearly colored when the maple was here because it was shaded so much. Well, it's interesting. So over there against the outdoor shower is a couple of clay pots. Well, those were collected in Wales, and they were collected at a potter who was on the top of a mountain. He had on the side of a mountain, and he had a big clay pit in the back of his shop, and a wagon that would go out and it would tip. He would shovel the clay from the back of on the mountainside there into the wagon, big wooden wagon. It was on little tracks, and he rolled it right into his shop. And then from there, he started his fabrication of his garden pots. And I've been grateful that I've been able to get them back from Wales in solid, no breaks, no cracks or anything like that. And they've served me well all these years. So it's, again, people and places that are all part of our landscape. The cherry tree, the Kwanzaa cherry, the big Kwanzaa cherry, was a gift from friends. And it was probably about 2 inches in diameter when we received it from them. There's nothing more glorious in May than a Kwanzaa cherry in blossom. And so that was a lovely remembrance. So you have to be patient as a gardener, because this looks pretty like nothing, but you can begin to see the daylilies popping up. Most of these are named varieties, and I try to keep a record of it and make sure I've got them straight. And I think most gardeners will agree, labeling is the hardest job in gardening. Keeping ourselves on track with what we have and what it is, but what the variety is. But this is a daffodil bed, so the daffodils do a lovely job. And then as their growth starts to die down, the daylilies come up and hide it. So it's a way to deal with that. And I've allowed, in this section, some lilies to grow. I have to be a little hard-hearted about it, though, because they can take over. And this is a stargazer lily, which is hugely fragrant and one like an Easter lily. Very nice. And then these are a variety of Asiatics. So when I was thinking about renovating, this area was in need of it. This little garden beside this extra parking area. And as hard as it was to take up the mums that were there, that I had brought from my aunt in Brewster, New York, to my home in Connecticut, to Rhode Island, I finally decided it was time. They were so full of grass, it's so full of mugwort. Gardeners will know what that is, terrible thing. That looks just like a chrysanthemum, but isn't. Anyway, it all came out with help, and I decided, because I don't really have annuals in this on this property, except for a few pots. There are no annuals to speak of. So I decided to allow this garden to be the annual spot, and it gives me an opportunity to do something different every year. So it's kind of an experiment. I decided to do salvia this year. And the salvia is because that was my mother's maiden name. So in a way, this reflects my mother's gardening skills that she taught me back in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And it's a magnificent annual. This is called Playing the Blues. That's the variety, Playing the Blues. And it's a very robust plant. And so in doing that, I decided it made a nice complement to the soft blush of New Dawn Rose. That New Dawn is a very old favorite. Many grandmothers' gardens will have New Dawn. And so I do try to keep it back. We need to do a little trimming here because my husband's going to get caught up in the rose bush the next time he goes by, but that's not a big deal. And so my bow to English gardens, because I spent a lot of time looking at gardens in England, and they are the master gardeners of the world, and they are spectacular in their approach to succession gardening. And that is starting with blossoms in April and running them right through October, November if you can. And that's what this garden tries to do, and pretty well succeeds. It's not the American style garden. American style garden is one where you have a plant, it's all by itself, and you appreciate it. Then there's maybe another few more of those, and then another group of plants, and they're all sort of nicely mulched and organized. And this is not that, and it tends to be a little confusing and maybe overwhelming for the American taste. But there's a term for this type of gardening that the English use called close boscage, B-O-S-C-A-G-E, boscage, which comes from the term of a forest, a close growing forest. And so when you plant this way, you don't eliminate weeds, but you certainly choke them out. And it gives you an opportunity to put the dahlias in, which are now just coming along here. 1, 2, 3, there's all the way through here. They will come up, they'll be up to about here, and they will continue blossoming starting in July. They will be blossoming through October or the first hard frost. So they are very valuable because they will carry the garden when some of the other stuff is passing by. The lilies were a friend, Roy Jacobson, a lovely man who's also a dahlia grower and a wonderful gardener, and he offered me these lilies. I am very grateful because when the spring garden passes by, which is generally, you know, the peonies and the iris, and their pinks and purples and like that, then you have to kind of wait for the summer garden to come along. And the Gloriosa daisies here are just budding up, and they'll be coming along soon. But you kind of have a lag, and these wonderful lilies, thanks to Roy, sort of carry the garden until we get to a full summer blossom. And this is the other beach plum that is the native plant. And when the garden is nothing in the winter and you're looking out, this is very architectural. It has a very nice, interesting look, and it draws the eye to the garden. We haven't limbed up as much as we reasonably can because the porch view to our water, we go right down to the ocean, to the pond here. Our land goes right down to the pond, and we want to be able to have a view from our porch across the lawn. That's why it isn't planted up, and down to our dock and down to the pond. So this isn't creating too much of a blockage, although my husband says I need to trim it up a little bit more. So this is, as I say, my nod to, my bow, if you will, to English gardening. And when you see an English garden, you know we can't come close. They have such a mild temperature. They have a very nice, misty, damp rainfall, and so we struggle to try to come close to what they do, but it's fun trying. It's really fun trying. It's kind of, I'm just turning you around here a bit. People wonder why this is in the middle of the yard. Why isn't it over by the fence here, you know? Well, before these folks came, there was a little ranch over there, and the yard was absolutely loaded with huge maples and big conifers, and they spilled out onto our property. We didn't know where the property line was, so we assumed where the trees were spilling over was the property line. And then when they built, we found out where the property line was. It was over here. So we put the fence up, and then they said they loved the fence, so then they put a fence down the other way. And it's worked good for them and for us too. So anyway, sort of floats out there in the middle of the yard. But the azalea are wonderful on both ends, and then the center there with the endless summer hydrangea are good. They just, and some people don't care for them. They think they don't have enough color. They're not the deep, deep blue, but they are quite beautiful, and I'm not complaining. They bloom beautifully. And the rose is called Carefree, and it really, truly is pretty carefree. I do deadhead it a bit, and then it'll blossom, continue to blossom, and then in the fall, or late in August, it'll produce a few more blossoms, kind of when the temperature cools down a bit. But and the Montauk daisy, that's a standard here. And if I were a little more ambitious, I think it's not too late for me to trim it back so it doesn't flop in October. But this is a pretty good stand, and it hasn't been really much of a problem. So I'm going to show an example of what the rabbits will do. They'll even get up on a pot. They didn't eat this one. They tried some of it, but this one they pretty well. And this is from my friend Gail Wentworth at Ender's Island in Connecticut. She's a fabulous dahlia grower. She gave me those, and I wanted to experiment with them, so I put them in the pot. And they even got on top of the pot. They just can't win sometimes. But all of these were, so many of what I have here was something that was given to me. Louis Raymond is a wonderful gardener. He's not gardening in Rhode Island anymore, darn it. But people will know him from the work that he did at Theater by the Sea. He was responsible for getting those gardens all beautifully restored, and he did the beautiful baskets that hung all along the pergola walk to the restaurant in the back. And so some of the stuff that I have in here are Lewis's plants. And this Lysimachia firecracker is the name. It doesn't look like very much, but it's spiced all through the garden. There's these dark leaves to offset all the green, trying to give a contrast to so much green. It has a very sweet little yellow flower on the top, which is the firecracker part. And this heuchera is Palace Purple, and it goes all along here. Now, if you were in England, you would probably have box, a little hedge of boxwood. They love their box, and in England they work beautifully. It's a little bit more tenuous to get box to do really well here. And I was a real estate broker, and I had worked with a family to sell them their home, and they announced they were going to dig up this whole area of their yard and put a pool in. It had a bunch of this. I thought, golly, what a shame. I asked, would you mind if I dug that up and salvaged it? Oh, feel free. So that has become my little offset. Again, looking to have something to offset all the green and kind of an edge to the, and I'm just, anybody who hears me say this will just kind of laugh, because it's such a conceited thing, my rooms. Because if you've been to any gardens, particularly those from the British Isles, they like to do areas that are separate and created their own space, something that you have to go into to see. And so on a very modest scale, I did 2 rooms. And so I hope they invite people in. And you know, we do get a lot of walkers, because this is an easy place to walk to the beach. So if you were here in July, you would see tons of dahlias, and they're all coming in. And I like dahlias, again, I like the dark foliage. I think it sets off the blossoms beautifully. And so there's a lot of dahlias tucked in here. This is another plant that I particularly like. It is penstemon Husker Red, and the red stems are what identifies that variety. The bees love it. It blooms for quite a long time. It makes a nice show. And when it goes by, I can cut it down and make room for the phlox. There's a white phlox that's right in here, all beside it. And that is David, white phlox David, which is a very nice contrast. White is a nice contrast. The foxgloves are biennials. And so you don't know for sure. You see the leaf in your garden, but you're not sure if it's, you know, if it bloomed this year, it won't bloom next year. So you have to wait 2 years for them to come back. And you're not sure where exactly they're going to come back. I forgive them any of the inconvenience, because I absolutely love the statuesque nature of them. And do you see how the bee, if you catch one of them, the bees actually crawl up inside the blossom And it's just amazing to me. See, oh, there they go. It's just a very wonderful plant in my estimation. So I'll save the seeds. There they go. There's a honeybee going in there. No, I don't know that's a honeybee. It's got a green head, so I don't think so. And, but I will save the seeds and scatter them about and keep my fingers crossed for 2 years from now that there'll be more of them. Russian sage, everybody knows, with that lovely blue spire that's going to be coming out here. More lilies, more dahlias. You know, there will be some people who look at this and say, why in the world all this rose campion? Well, first, it was free. It just put itself here. So why not? And then I learned to like it. And when it's gone by, you need to really just cut it down. And that's okay. But it's such an incredibly brilliant color. And it just spikes everything up. But one of the things I discovered this year, it makes a nice, I love to do floral arrangements. And it makes a lovely floral arrangement. And it's like a sunflower. When you put it in the window, the blossoms turn to the outside. So you turn your arrangement around, so you're seeing the blossoms, and guess what? They turn. It's an amazing, so it has to be in the sunflower family, though I did not have any expectation that it is because of the gray leaf. So I need to do a little research on that, but I think it's really quite a special plant. So more dahlias from people that I value, friends that I value, that Polygerlimeti, so I don't know if there's anything else worth a mention here. One thing that a number of us gardeners will do is we'll cut the phlox and the asters down. It would typically be way up here, and we cut it down so that what happens, each flower stalk becomes sort of double at that point. It's a fuller plant. Another option you have, and I've done it in years past, is to cut half of it down and let the other half grow up. So that blooms, and then you have a cycle of bloom. Then the lower stuff blooms later. But it's an interesting, kind of play with it a bit. And then the lilies, other lilies that are coming here and there, are all going to add. The daylilies are just getting ready. There's a bare spot here, and that's because there was a magnificent oriental poppy, the orange poppy, the standard oriental poppy. And so, but that's a good thing because it gives room for some of the other plants that are trying to get some air and light, and they'll benefit from the fact that there's. And Louis Raymond's Lysimachia firecracker here again. Yeah, so lots of friends in here, lots of gifts, lots of memories. And I've enjoyed, people say, oh, it's so much work. Oh, no, it's a love.
Yeah. Could you say thank you for coming to tend it?
I really am delighted to have you visit, to share the garden, and I'm hopeful that it is a way in which the library can benefit. And so I'm more than happy and have done this over the years. So thank you for coming and sharing.